Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. You know, this has been an odd week for me because we started out, obviously, with the shootings over the weekend. And for those of you that listened to my short podcast on Monday about gun violence, you know that I was just kind of overwhelmed by not only the news coverage, but by the reaction of everybody, which I thought was so over the top. And yesterday I tried to explain a little bit about, you know, the whole meaning of the Second Amendment and why we should put these acts of violence into perspective. Today I want to talk about it again for just a moment because there is a frightening trend, in my opinion, in this country in reaction to what we see going on in terms of these mass shootings. And I know that we had 2 mass shootings back to back. And so that exacerbates the media coverage and causes the media coverage to be even more over the top than it normally would be. But there's a deep kind of frightening trend that I see not only in the media coverage, but that I see in the reaction to these 2 acts of senseless violence. Let me give a little perspective before we go into the one individual that I've greatly admired when he was a United States congressman, who said something on Fox News over the weekend in an exclusive interview that I've kind of heard. I mean, I heard some discussion about it, but then I finally listened to the full interview, and I must say, I'm outraged. I'm absolutely outraged. But first, a little perspective. On Sunday, physicists, you know, and I usually make fun, I don't make fun of his name, but I intentionally mispronounce his name, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I want to use his actual name because on Sunday, August 4 at 11:58 a.m., Dr. Tyson, whatever, tweeted the following, to which he received 312,000 plus likes, 90,000 retweets, but for which he was vilified on the left for having said what I'm about to tell you what he said. He tweeted out the following: in the past 48 hours, the USA horrifically lost 34 to mass shootings. On average, across any 48 hours, we also lose 500 to medical errors, 300 to the flu, 250 to suicide, 200 to car accidents, and 40 to homicide via handgun. Often, our emotions respond more to spectacle than to data. There's the data. I gave you the CDC data about the top 10 causes of death in the United States. But I think what Neil deGrasse Tyson has pointed out here in a short tweet summarizes what I tried to say yesterday. We lost 34 people in these mass shootings. And on average, in any 48-hour period, we also lose 500 deaths to medical errors. Nobody goes to the doctor or to the hospital expecting to die. They may expect to die from whatever trauma, injury, disease, sickness, illness they have. They walk into a doctor's office or they walk into a hospital or a clinic, maybe expecting to die from that, but they do not expect to die from medical errors. Yet, on average, we lose, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, we lose 500 people to medical errors, meaning those are 500 people that died that walked into a hospital expecting to get well and instead succumbed to a medical error. In the same any given 48-hour period, we lose 300 people to influenza. We lose 250 people to suicide. I might point out that suicide, which is obviously a reaction to depression or to any sort of mental illness, is often masked, and often, if not always, because, well, they end up succeeding in committing suicide. We fail to recognize the signs, and I'm not sure that there is anything that we can do. We can, once again, we can outlaw guns, we can confiscate guns, we can buy back guns, we can do anything we want to. People who want to commit suicide are still going to find ways to commit suicide. We lose, and this is the one that drives me the battiest. In any given 48 hours, we also lose 200 people to car accidents. Nobody gets in their vehicle, unless, of course, they're intent on using their vehicle to commit suicide. Nobody gets in their vehicle expecting to end up dead in a car accident. I had a very good friend of mine who was doing a trip through New Mexico, Taos, Santa Fe, down to Albuquerque, down to Rio Doce and around, who on their way back, on the last day of their trip, came upon a single car accident. They're not sure whether the tire blew out or they hit a pothole or what, but a single car accident in which 5 of 7 family members died. Now, of course, that's not a very nice way to end up using your last day of your vacation with friends. But my friend told me about the 30 minutes in which they had to wait, because this was in a rural part of New Mexico, that they had to wait for emergency personnel to get there. Fortunately, some of the cars that pulled off, a couple of were nurses. They were able to do some triage, but not very much. But 200 people die in any given 48 hours to car accidents. Nobody gets in their car expecting to die once they get in that car. And we lose 40 in any given 48 hours to homicide via handgun. And, of course, I gave you the stats about Chicago over the weekend, over the same weekend that these 2 mass shootings occurred. So the point I'm trying to make is we have this visceral, emotional reaction that is not borne out in any way, shape, or form by the facts. Yes, the people who died in El Paso and Dayton were shopping at Walmart or in that entertainment district, not expecting to die, not expecting for a gunman to walk up and randomly kill them. None of us expect that. So when he says, yes, we lost 34 people horrifically to mass shootings, on average across any 48 hours, we also lose, and I just want to keep drilling these stats into your head. In any given 48 hours, we also lose 500 to medical errors. You don't expect that. 300 to influenza. You don't think you're going to die from the flu. Of course, I suppose that depends on how your body's immune system is compromised. 250 people to suicide, 200 to car accidents, and 40 to homicide via a handgun. And as he says, often our emotions respond more to spectacle than to data. So what's the underlying trend that I'm beginning to see that has me bothered? That underlying trend is, I think, personified or perhaps articulated best by Trey Gowdy, the former congressman from South Carolina, former prosecutor, former district attorney, who did an incredible job as a United States congressman pointing out the falsities, the falsehoods, the errors, whatever it might be, in congressional hearings. In an interview with Maria Bartiromo, I'm not going to play the entire interview, but I want you to listen to this portion.
Just depravity, evil. The right to life is the most fundamental, basic, primary right that we have. It is the right from which all other rights emanate. It doesn't matter if you have a right to a lawyer if you're dead. It doesn't matter if you have the right to free speech if you're dead. It doesn't matter if you have the right to keep and bear arms if you're dead. So on a personal level, I'm willing to subrogate any of my other rights to avoid another Sandy Hook, another Pulse nightclub, another day like we had yesterday. But I'm out of politics, and I'm not going back. So the legislators need to look at the laws we have on the books. Are they being enforced? If the answer is yes, and we still have gaps in our laws that need to be fixed, keep in mind, you don't have a single right for which there's not some corresponding responsibility or restriction. Every right you have has a restriction. So if we need more restrictions, then draw the causal scientific link between what you're proposing and what you hope to be the outcome.
Did you catch that? Did you catch his point about he is willing to subjugate all of his other rights?
Just depravity, evil. The right to life is the most fundamental, basic, primary right that we have. It is the right from which all other rights emanate. It doesn't matter if you have a right to a lawyer if you're dead. It doesn't matter if you have the right to free speech if you're dead. It doesn't matter if you have the right to keep and bear arms if you're dead. So on a personal level, I'm willing to subrogate any of my other rights to avoid another Sandy Hook.
So Trey Gowdy just announced that he is willing to subrogate his rights, all or any of his rights guaranteed under the Constitution, in order to preserve life. That is an incredibly dangerous and an incredibly irrational reaction to the shootings that took place in El Paso and Dayton. And let me explain why. He goes on to point out that there are, and to some degree there are, every right, and I think this is how this country's gotten off course if you want to know the truth, but there is, in every single right guaranteed by the Constitution, either through legislation or legislation that has been upheld by courts or by activist courts themselves, there have been placed upon every single constitutional right some sort of limitation or restriction. Now, I would argue that the plain meaning, this is why I'm an originalist, the plain meaning of the rights guaranteed by the Constitution don't really need any restrictions or any limitations. Why do we have, for example, let's take the one that is the most obvious, free speech. The courts have ruled, for example, that you can limit to a certain degree time, place, and manner of speech if there is an overriding, and for the lawyers listening, I'm just giving a generality here, so don't email me or text me or yell at me. But the courts have carved out this time, place, and manner exception to free speech. So that what you end up with when you have, for example, the Democrat National Convention in Denver, Colorado, which we had, almost 10, 11 years ago, they have carved out free speech zones so that demonstrators who want to go, yell and march and hold up placards or do whatever, have to go inside an area that has been designated by barbed wire and chain link fence in order to make it easier for law enforcement to control crowds. Isn't that back-assward? Because my theory is this. If you don't have enough cops in order to control the crowds, and so you have to limit people's free speech, because what good is the free speech? What good is the speech if I have to go to downtown Denver and stand outside a chain-linked area, but I don't want to listen to the person that is yelling or chanting or whatever that's up against the chain link fence. I want to hear the guy that's in the middle of the crowd. I want to hear the guy in the middle of the crowd that has a unique sign that is saying something that I can't hear over the din of everybody else. And so now I have to subject myself to that crowd to go in to hear that speaker. Law enforcement, if they truly wanted to do so, could massively move in, keep the streets clear so that traffic could still move. If they needed a pathway or an ability of convention goers to get from point A to point B, to get, for example, from hotels to the convention center itself, law enforcement in massive numbers, using cars, barricades, whatever they need to do, could provide that. And I know that's a massive, expensive undertaking. But I believe that that is a massive, expensive undertaking that the taxpayers that have agreed to host this convention should bear the cost of doing that, so that people can walk up and down the sidewalks carrying their placards, talk to any newsman anywhere, talk about anything they want to at any time. So yes, I'm a purist in that sense. I don't believe, for example, as I've said 1,000 times, that I should have to get a license to conceal carry what has been determined to be an individual right to keep and bear arms, a right which the founders said shall not be infringed. Think of all the carve-outs we have for the Fourth Amendment in trying to define what is an unreasonable search and seizure. We've carved out all of these exceptions. Wait a minute. Can't we just agree on what is just an unreasonable search and seizure? But no, as society has gotten more complex, we have carved out, little by little, exception by exception, to where the Fourth Amendment of 1789 is, well, or later, is not really the Fourth Amendment that we recognize today, or the Fifth Amendment, or the 10th Amendment. Does anybody even know what the 10th Amendment is? So Trey Gowdy, in my opinion, personifies the kind of emotional reaction, the over-the-top reaction to, and I know, before anybody jumps down my throat, let me say it once again. The death of these individuals in El Paso and in Dayton are horrific, tragic events. Likewise, so are the deaths of all of those who in any 48 hours died because of a medical error, medical malpractice, or that died because of influenza, or who saw no other potential or reason for living, and by some manner committed suicide. Or the one that still, I would put at the top of the list, the 200 people that die in any given 48 hours due to car accidents that never expected to get in their car and die. They were driving the speed limit. They had their seatbelts on. They weren't impaired by alcohol or marijuana or any other drug or they weren't putzing around on their telephone. They were driving. They had their hands at 10 and 2. They were paying attention to whatever they were supposed to be paying attention to. And somebody else kills them. When we start having United States congressmen talking about subrogating their right, all of their rights, in order to preserve life, I want you to take that to its logical conclusion. I agree that life is fundamental. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if we try to create a society where life itself, and I believe that life is paramount, don't get me wrong, but I also know, I said to someone, I'm trying to think, where did I say this the other day? Let me think. I don't remember where I said it, but what I did say was to this young man, yes, we have to do these things because apparently we're unwilling to live in a risk-free society. And he turned to me and he said, I never considered that. This is a guy that looked to be maybe 28, 32 years old. So maybe I got him to stop and think for a moment about, yes, when you try to create a society that has no risk in it, you create a society where you don't and cannot live life to its fullest. And I certainly don't want government trying to create a risk-free society. Everything that we do, every single thing that we do involves risk. But we're not willing to accept that. And when we see something horrific happen, we want somebody to do something. And that somebody, in the case of Trey Gowdy, is apparently the government. Because who else? I mean, he can say all day long that he wants to subrogate his rights so that other people never die. Well, I don't know who else other than the government, other than his acquiescence to the government, can subrogate those rights. This is a dangerous slope that we are on right now. And yes, I'm screaming from the mountaintop. And I have a radical position, and I know that. But the Second Amendment, as all amendments, were kept in place or written to do one simple thing, to guarantee that you and I can live in liberty. All I can think about is I taught a course for a semester or two about the Patriot Act. And I think everybody expected me, all these law students, as I walked in at the beginning of a semester, expected me to be nothing more than a sycophant for the Patriot Act. But post 9/11, we took away many Americans' rights, very subtly, ostensibly on a limited basis, and we couched it, because who can be opposed to something that's called the Patriot Act? My God, we're all patriots. We all want to preserve and protect this republic. But that's not what the Patriot Act did. Look at the kind of, and in many cases it's in the private sector, so you knowingly and willingly, or sometimes unknowingly or unwittingly do it. You give up all your data. You give up all your privacy. If you choose to do that in the private sector, have at it. I don't care. I do what I can to protect my privacy, to protect everything that I do from prying eyes in the private sector. And I know, eyes wide open, that when I engage in Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of the social media platform, I understand what the terms of service are, and I get that I'm giving up my data, but I try to do it in such a way that I limit my exposure. May not be very successful, but I try. But when it comes to the government, because you've got to remember this about the government has guns. The government has the facade, the imprimatur of authority. So when you give up your rights, when you, in Trey Gowdy's terms, when you subrogate your rights to the government, you are giving over power to the government, and you're giving the government the authority to exercise that power over you. We're on a very slippery slope. And I think it's just because we had two of these shootings back to back. Be very, very careful. I understand that what happened is horrific and it's tragic. But you know what? Countries that have tried to implement all sorts of gun buybacks, countries that have tried to limit the use of long guns, handguns, still experience murder, mass stabbings. Think about the dirtbag in China that with swords and knives committed a mass atrocity. Didn't do it with a gun, yet you had the same kind of tragedy in a communist, horrendously controlling government. You still had a similar tragedy. Do you want to live in freedom that is risky, or do you want to live in tyranny that takes away and controls what you do. That's the point we're reaching in this country. That's the progressive left. And I used to say that's the progressive left versus conservatives. But now with Trey Gowdy and others, Donald Trump talking about various forms of red flag laws, another infringement of the Fourth Amendment, another infringement on due process. We're looking at now a society that is not willing to live in liberty and the risk that comes with that. Where do you stand? Because I'd bet you $1 to a donut. There are people that have listened to me over a decade plus on radio who've been listening to this podcast, who in response to what happened is saying to themselves, yeah, I might be willing to give up some of my gun rights if, in the vernacular of the left, if it'll save just one life. You are a building block toward tyranny. I'll be right back. If, for example, you don't think that these tragedies are being politicized, all you have to do is listen to Joe Biden. Bingo. The operative word is bingo.
So to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns.
Bingo. You're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period. Look, the Second Amendment doesn't say you can't restrict the kinds of weapons people can own. You can't buy a bazooka. You can't have a flamethrower. The guys who make these arguments are the people who say the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots.
Yes, that's true. But by the way, I can probably get a flamethrower. Not sure I can get a bazooka, although I've always wanted one. I can own a tank. Yes, I can own a tank. I have some friends, degrees of separation, who have friends who own tanks. But listen to what Biden says about the purpose of the Second Amendment.
The protection against the government. We need an F-15 for that.
Oh, the Second Amendment is about protection against the government. Well, you need an F-15 for that. Really? 2 words, with all due respect to my veterans. Viet Cong. Pol Pot. You don't need an F-15. The American revolutionaries, which constituted less than 10% of the population, went up against the most successful, heavily armed professional army at the time in the history of the world, the British Empire, the Redcoats. And that 10% of the population, through guerrilla, what today we would call guerrilla warfare, was able to defeat that massive army.
You need something well beyond whether or not you're going to have an assault weapon.
So how would you deal with all the assault weapons that are already out there that people have?
What I would do is I would institute a national buyback program, and I would move in the direction of making sure that in fact was what we tried to do, get them off the street.
But that's not confiscating people.
No, that's not walking into their homes, knocking on their doors, going through their gun cabinets, etc.
So people would be...
So, and I'm not even sure what the next question is. So it's not a confiscation. It's just a voluntary gun buyback program. Well, I'm not going to participate. My guns aren't for sale. None of my guns are for sale. So he says that, no, it's not, we're going to knock down your door. So he admits that it's going to be completely ineffective.
Allowed to keep the weapons they already have.
Right now, there's no legal way that I'm aware of that you could deny them the right if they had legally purchased them. But we can, in fact, make a major effort to get them off the street and out of the possession of people.
Get them off the street and out of the possession of people. So he's going to go after what? Criminals? We already go after criminals. An assault weapon ban. We've tried it. It failed. From September 1994 to September 2004, the duration of the assault weapons ban, there were 15 mass shootings over that 10-year period, an average of 1.5 a year. And I know that's lower, but the point being, if the purpose of the assault weapons ban is to prevent mass shootings, we've tried it. It failed. I emphasize again, pay attention. Pay attention to both parties, because the media and people like Trey Gowdy and others are demanding that something be done. It's not the gun. It's the individual. It's the society. It's the culture. We're rotting. I'll be right back. There is a major news article in the Los Angeles Times yesterday about migrants who are stuck on the Mexico side are beginning to head home. At the Nuevo Laredo parking lot, as Mexican officials came and went from an air-conditioned office, migrants camped on pallets strewn among their cars, some huddled under a metal carport, sharing a foul-smelling bathroom and bathing with outdoor hoses. Children played with empty water bottles and shards of grass. Honduran migrant Jose Antonio Mancia Hernandez could not imagine staying with his 10-month-old son Dylan until their next court hearing, September 20. He told the LA Times, "It's like a psychological thing they're doing, trying to make us go back to our countries." Claudia Lopez Galvez, a 37-year-old woman, said, "They don't secure us. We can't bathe. They don't have food. They treat us like dogs." She fled Guatemala with her 16-year-old daughter. The story says, over the last 5 months, the United States has returned more than 20,000 asylum seekers to Tijuana, Mexicali, Juarez, Nuevo Laredo, and Matamoros, according to Mexican officials. An analysis of immigration court records by the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse at Syracuse University showed that 1,155 remain in Mexico asylum cases had been decided by the end of June. Only 14, or 1.2% with attorneys, not a single person, had been granted asylum, and almost 13,000 cases remain pending. It's not clear how many asylum seekers sent to wait in Mexico have abandoned their legal cases and headed back to the countries they fled. A Mexican official in Baja California state estimated about half there had left for home. Along the border in recent days, the Times reports, thousands of migrants have faced the same quandary. Many, now penniless or saddled with debt from their trips north, have decided to head back. Some said they still plan to pursue their U.S. immigration cases, but many more said they just hope to make it home without being kidnapped or killed. Parenthetical comment here. Did they not have the same concern coming to the northern Mexico border about being kidnapped or killed? I imagine they did. But you see, the lure of an open border, that overwhelmed the fear of being murdered or kidnapped, which proves my point. If the message just gets out, you cannot make your asylum case in the United States. You either have to do it in your home country or you have to remain in Mexico. That will stem the tide of asylum seekers more than any wall we could ever build. The Times story goes on to say that nowhere is safety more of a concern than in Nuevo Laredo's, and I can't pronounce this, Tamaulipas state, where 3,000 migrants have been returned despite U.S. State Department warnings against traveling there due to kidnappings and other violent crimes, according to Jose Martin Carmona, head of the state government's Institute for Migrants. The entrance to the parking lot, where the migrants waited near the border bridge, lacks armed security. The migrants were desperate for food. Some children begged their parents for a drink of water. I know this all sounds horrible. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? Children playing with empty bottles of water and shards of glass, people begging for food, people fearing they're going to be kidnapped or murdered. They made the choice. And shame on us for enticing them here with the idea that, oh, you can so simply get asylum if you just show up. No, that's not the case. And those who now understand that you're not going to get a get-out-of-jail card free to enter the United States, to be given a court date, and then to be let loose into American society, never to be heard from again. Even when your court date comes, you're not going to show up. They know it. We know it. So by simply making them remain in Mexico or to remain in their home country, boom, they go back. Mendez-Reyes said, in all the border cities, this is a problem. And busing migrants south is the only solution. Vendors, meanwhile, have swooped in to gouge the returnees stranded in the parking lot for cell phone charging, diapers, clothes, among other things. Couriers, who charged a fee to pick up money relatives had wired to those waiting in Laredo, sometimes vanish with the cash. Some families said they had spent $500 in 4 days on food and water alone. No doctors or lawyers visited Thursday, although immigration officials summoned an ambulance twice for children who were suffering from the 104-degree heat. Again, I say shame on us. And shame on those who claim that open borders, who allow this enticement to occur, an enticement that is so strong that, they fear going back. They fear not necessarily going back to their country. They fear the trip from Laredo or Juarez. They fear the trip back to their country through Mexico because that's where they fear being murdered or kidnapped. Take away the inducement, take away the enticement, they stop. Yes, we still need border security. Yes, we still need immigration reform. But if we just stop with the open borders propaganda, the open borders attitude, that alone will stem the tide. Doesn't take a rocket scientist. It just takes common sense. Hang on. I'll be right back. I don't know why I didn't try to find a sponsor to let me go to the Democrat Socialists of America convention. I've seen a lot of video. They don't want people. It's funny because they don't want people. They don't want plants inside their convention talking about things they're discussing. Yet I've probably seen on my Twitter feed at least 3 or 4 videos of people that have videoed portions of the convention. I particularly like this one. This has to do with the rules of the Democratic Socialist Convention. Imagine going to a convention. Many of you professionals, many of you that have, blue-collar jobs, whatever, you go to a church convention, you go to a business convention, you go to a convention that has to do with your hobby or what you do in your spare time. Imagine going to a convention and some nut job in looks like a Fidel Castro uniform stands up at the beginning and tells you this.
Quiet rooms that are available, there's a range of options of these, right? One thing to note there, please don't go into that space with anything that's like an aggressive scent, for instance, right? First and foremost, use the proper doors. Don't try and exit through these or any other sort of like fun shortcuts you see. You have to have your credentials at all times. There are right-wing infiltrators who are trying to get in here and generally try to be chill, right? Take a deep breath. Feel better before you say anything. Please don't tweet photos of your credentials. If you have friends here that you would like to be here and they don't have credentials, don't let them in. Don't make exceptions for those people. Don't really talk to anybody who doesn't have a credential, especially if they claim to be from the press. Please do not talk to anybody who identifies themselves as a member of the press. Don't talk to cops. Don't talk to MAGA assholes. Don't talk to cops if there are cops there for any reason at all, right? If you do see someone talking to cops, let the marshals know.
I particularly like the part at the beginning where, imagine, you can't...
We have quiet rooms that are available. There's
a quiet room. Yes, I'm just... when I I've heard so much about how the white supremacists, the white nationalists, I've heard so much about how those right-wing nut jobs, they're out to aggravate me. I need a quiet room. But I also need
range of options of these, right? One thing to note there, please don't go into that space with anything that's like an aggressive scent.
The quiet room, no aggressive scents. S-C-E-N-T-S. There's no sense, S-E-N-S-E, at this convention. But don't go into the quiet room with an aggressive scent. Now, I don't know whether an aggressive scent is like really bad BO. That might be a trigger warning for some of you, and I apologize. Or whether it's like too much perfume, or if you got really bad gas. If you have really bad gas, there was a street vendor outside, and they had really good burritos. Like you can get at the ballpark. Don't eat the crap inside the ballpark. Oh no! If you ever go to Coors Field to watch a Rockies game in Denver, get the burritos sold by the Hispanic ladies outside. Mwah, delicioso. But if you have one of those, and then you go inside the Democratic Socialists of America convention, and you need to go to the quiet room because you're just overwhelmed with everything, and you've had a couple of those burritos at lunch, no farting in the quiet room, okay? Just no farting in the quiet room. President Trump talked about the U.S. humanitarian aid that was blocked at the border of Venezuela and Colombia. He talked about a C-17 that landed in Colombia that had nutrition kits, food, water, clothing, all sorts of necessities for the people of Venezuela. But, of course, Maduro blocked it.
Unfortunately, dictator Maduro has blocked this life-saving aid from entering the country. He would rather see his people starve than give them aid, than help them. Millions of Venezuelans are starving and suffering, while a small handful at the top of the Maduro regime plunder the nation into poverty and into death. We know who they are, and we know where they keep the billions of dollars that they have stolen. Incredibly, there are members of the Venezuelan military still barely supporting this failed dictatorship. They are risking their future. They are risking their lives and Venezuela's future for a man controlled by the Cuban military and protected by a private army of Cuban soldiers. Maduro is not a Venezuelan patriot. He is a Cuban puppet. That's what he is.
Well, late Monday, the president signed an executive order imposing a harsh Cuba-style economic embargo on Venezuela as part of his effort to force Nicolas Maduro out of power. He sent a letter to Congress saying the measure was necessary in light of Maduro's, quote, continued usurpation of power and, quote, ongoing human rights abuses in a South American nation. Now, the new measures slapped, I think, more than 100 current and former Venezuelan officials with sanctions. The measures that he signed on Monday put the country on par with Cuba, Iran, Syria, and North Korea as being economically isolated by the United States. Now, they did carve out exceptions for food, clothing, and other humanitarian aid being sent to Venezuela, but of course, the aid has to get there. We can send all the C-17s that we want to loaded with all these supplies, but if Maduro doesn't allow those supplies into the country, it doesn't do any good. I don't know whether at some point we do like a Berlin airlift or whatever, but at some point, these economic sanctions will surely bring Maduro down and allow for free and open elections and allow American aid to get to the people of Venezuela. And both you and I know that you and I have a vested interest because of our friend in Venezuela right now. Hang on, I'll be right back. one of the things that I've argued for over, 10 years or more is I believe that these McCain-Feingold, which is the kind of the seminal piece of legislation that controls how much you can contribute to a campaign, obviously offered by Senator Feingold of Minnesota, I think, and John McCain, formerly of Arizona, I think is an absolute horrific assault on the First Amendment. Campaign money, me contributing to a campaign of any sort, is a form of speech. Look, if somebody can do an artifact of Jesus Christ in a jar of human urine, name it Piss Christ, and it is protected in the name of free speech, then me deciding to contribute to somebody and their campaign for congressman, president, dog catcher, whatever it might be, is also a form of speech. And I think these campaign contribution limits are, I believe they're unconstitutional, but the Supreme Court disagrees with me, and obviously members of Congress disagree with me. I've only always argued that if I want to be able to give X number of dollars to a campaign, whether that be $5 or $5 million, the only requirement should be that I, as the recipient of that money, as the candidate, disclose that I received $5 million or $5 from Michael Brown. It's just a matter of transparency. That way I can see who the supporters are. And if I think that George Soros or, I don't care, Michael Bloomberg or Tim Cook of Apple or Bill Gates of Microsoft or anybody else, if I see that they're giving, boatloads of money to a particular candidate, that might inform my decision about whether or not I want to support that particular candidate. And quite frankly, if I want to find people who have contributed to campaigns, I can go to an organization like opensecrets.org, and I can look up particular federal campaigns in particular, and some gubernatorial campaigns, opensecrets.org, and I can see who has contributed. I can see the PACs that have contributed. I can see the individuals that contributed. And I can get basic information, the name of the individual, who they work for, if they're retired, semi-retired, or whatever. If I want to dig further and get more information, such as their addresses, then I have to go to the campaign. I have to go to other sources to get that information. But there's now a Democrat congressman who's really pulling a dangerous stunt by outing specific San Antonians who fund Donald Trump. Now, I suppose it's different when Democrats target private citizens, but I'm not sure that that's a difference with a distinction. Joaquin Castro, a member of the United States Congress from San Antonio, tweeted out the following: "Sad to see so many San Antonians as 2019 maximum donors to Donald Trump. The owner of @BillMillerBarbecue, owner of the @Historic Pearl, realtor Phyllis Browning, etc. Their contributions," he writes in the tweet, "are fueling a campaign of hate that labels Hispanic immigrants as invaders." The tweet is then followed by a list of retirees and the names of their businesses who have contributed the maximum amount to the Trump campaign. I'm not going to tell you what the list is. These are private citizens, not political opponents. Yet now we have a sitting member of the House of Representatives who has made their names public, thereby putting them at risk of harassment, doxing, or worse. His campaign has literally invited trouble upon them. Now, how can this be acceptable to anyone from either side of the aisle? As I said, donor information is public. One can do the research themselves and find the names. But the fact that an elected official is responsible for doing this is, in my opinion, reprehensible. And it's just really staggering that this is happening only a few days after a horrific mass shooting that left 22 people dead in Castro's home state of Texas. Tone deaf? Cynical? vicious? I think he's all of those things. There's just no excuse. Joaquin Castro is a disgrace of a human being. He brings shame to himself, his party, his district, especially if, some of the individuals live in his district. I can only hope that no harm comes to anybody on the list. Now, interestingly, Joaquin Castro retweeted these remarks from his brother Julian after the El Paso massacre. He retweeted this: "That is no accident, the shooting. That is due in part to the climate this president has set of division, of otherness. Good to know no one else but Trump can add fuel to the ugly fires of division and otherness. No accidents indeed. P.S. So far, not a peep from big media about this, but hey, I would just suggest, it's kind of hard to believe reporters would be as deathly quiet about politicians posting target lists of businesses whose owners donated to opponents if Donald Trump were doing it. Who's sowing the discourse? Who's sowing the division in the country? Joaquin Castro and his brother Julian running for president. That's who's doing it. Speaking of which, I hadn't really planned to talk about this, but this is a pretty good segue because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is in the news. She sicks her social media mob on high school kids and then deletes the post. Here's the essence of the story. A bunch of teenagers that support or at least live in Mitch McConnell's home state of Kentucky were photographed hugging and kind of kissing and kind of just in a funny teenage boy kind of way, hanging around a cardboard cutout. You've seen these cardboard cutouts where you can go stand next to somebody famous, except it's a cardboard cutout, and have your photograph taken. Well, that's what these kids were doing. They were hugging a cardboard cutout of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She went ballistic over it. She was so upset because these kids, I guess, in having fun, were, horrors of horrors, were having their photograph taken in a cardboard cutout of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The best part of this story, before I tell you what she ultimately did, is that once she tweeted out, "Hey, at Senate Majority Leader, these young men look like they work for you. Just wanted to clarify, are you paying for young men to practice groping and choking members of Congress with your payroll? Or is this just the standard culture of hashtag Team Mitch?" And then there's this photograph of these teenage boys. And it looks like all boys. Feminist Next Door tweeted out, pictured 7 young white men in Team Mitch t-shirts gathered around a distressed-looking cardboard at AOC, groping and kissing her. The caption, "Break me off a piece of that." And then she ends her tweet by saying, "Future federal judges of America." I actually think that's pretty clever. Stupid, but clever. But here comes Mitch McConnell's social media team for the dunk and the win. Caleb Hull tweeted out, "Team Mitch in no way condones any aggressive, suggestive, or demeaning act toward life-sized cardboard cutouts of any gender in a manner similar to what we saw from President Obama's speechwriting staff several years ago," and attaches to that tweet a picture of members of Obama's speechwriting staff, and we know they are because they've been identified, and we see Obama staff on their t-shirts standing around a cardboard cutout of Hillary Rodham Clinton, with one of the boys sticking a beer in her cardboard mouth and one of the other boys grabbing her cardboard boob. Anyway, so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez gets all upset about it. So she does just what Joaquin Castro did. She attempts to dox these teenage boys by saying, here's the close-up in case you're having trouble recognizing them in the photo they posted to social media. Looking forward to hearing your update on these hashtag Team Mitch values. So she got upset that kids at a Mitch McConnell event posted a picture fooling around and hugging a cardboard cutout of her. So she posted the picture so her mob could track them down and dox them. She later deleted the tweet, but it's clear she was pointing at her followers to identify the kids. That was then followed up by people actually doxing the kids, naming their school and trying to get to them. Good job there, AOC, sicking a mob of yahoos on a bunch of kids goofing around. Talk about abuse of power. Yeah. I swear. Things are they're just out of control. Stupid, but still out of control. Hang on, I'll be right back. I don't want any of you to waste any money on the Washington Post, and here's an example of why I don't want you to waste money on the Washington Post. Let me do that for you. Now, it took them a while, but the Washington Post has finally managed to link Donald Trump to the Russians, and they did it through hamburgers. In a story in the Post, they say, it's high summer, hamburger season. The char, the fat, the squishy perfection of processed bread sopping up the overflowing juices. Doesn't it somehow seem like Americans' birthright? There's a reason that President Trump chose to serve hamburgers twice as an all-American feast for some all-American championship college football players. Now that's true enough. Hamburgers are the American national food, which is no doubt why the Washington Post seems to find them, well, repulsive. The Post continued, but peel back the oil-spattered pages of history, and you'll find that the hamburger so closely aligned with the stars and stripes was also embraced by the hammer and sickle. Yep, like so much about this current administration, even Trump's beloved hamburgers have surprising ties to Russia. I'm not making this up. No, I'd tell you if I was making it up. That's exactly what the story says. From there, the article immediately deteriorates into, well, if that wasn't utter nonsense, into more utter nonsense. Somehow raving insanely about people eating hamburgers in the Soviet Union. You know, the millions who starved under Lenin and Stalin would have killed for a chance to have their first and probably only hamburger. A Russian bureaucrat visited the USA to learn about industrial approaches to food production. Afterward, luckier Russians could find a kind of meatloaf vaguely resembling bunless football-shaped hamburgers in government-run cafeterias. Thereby, the Washington Post proves that not only Trump, but also hamburgers are in league with the Russians. So if you're going to be a good liberal, stick to tofu and arugula. And thus ends the food segment of Michael Brown Unplugged. I'll be right back. And this really isn't a very good segue, but the sidewalks that surround Ahmed al-Barak's corner market in one of San Francisco's roughest neighborhoods are filled with cardboard, used syringes, homeless people who have nowhere safe to go at night. But al-Barak says it's an improvement from a year ago, before the city posted a portable toilet across the street from his business in the Tenderloin district. He no longer regularly sees people relieve themselves in broad daylight, and he doesn't see as much feces and urine on the streets. In his opinion, it's the one bright spot in a city where taxes are too high. He says in this article, "We used to have a disaster here. I used to call the city all the time to come and clean because they don't know where to go," he said, recalling one woman in particular who shrugged at him in "what can you do" gesture as she just squatted to pee. So San Francisco started its pit stop program back in July of 2014 with public toilets in the city's homeless-heavy Tenderloin district after children complained of dodging human waste on their way to school. Well, today, the staffed bathrooms have grown from the initial 3 locations to 25 locations, and the program has expanded to Los Angeles. In May, the toilets in San Francisco recorded nearly 50,000 flushes. Now, that's not the end of the paragraph in the story. 50,000 flushes. Let me tell you how this sentence reads in full. In May, the toilets in San Francisco recorded nearly 50,000 flushes, all logged by attendants. So you know when you go to the fancy schmancy hotel and you walk into the, you're at a convention somewhere and you're at the Four Seasons or you're at the JW Marriott, you're at the Hyatt, whatever, and you walk into the bathroom because you've been listening to Michael Brown speak and, oh man, you got to pee real badly, and you go in and there's an attendant. Well, for the portable toilets, and when I say portable toilet, that doesn't really do it justice. I want you to imagine like a small van with a door on the side, and it says Soma Pit Stop. And then there's a nice ramp for handicapped people, and then a little rail for handicapped people, and a nice door. And you go inside, and there's an attendant. San Franciscans are not only paying for the portable toilets outside Ahmed al-Barak's corner market, but they're paying for an attendant inside, I guess in case, like that woman who just squatted to pee, maybe for those who don't know how to wipe themselves or don't know how to flush, there's an attendant inside paid for by the taxpayers. And you tell me that American culture hasn't denigrated to the point that, well, yes, we provide toilets for homeless people, but we do the flushing for them too. Thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. You know the drill. You can find the podcast anywhere, whatever podcast app you use. Just search for Michael Brown Unplugged, and it'll be on your podcast app every morning. Well, with the exception of the iHeart app, which for whatever reason for the past week has not been getting it uploaded to their system until mid-afternoon or so. But hey, who am I to complain, right? And also follow us on social media. Easiest way to do that is to go to the website, michaelbrowntoday.com. Just go to michaelbrowntoday.com, and there you can click on for YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of them right there at michaelbrowntoday.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.